This man was one of a small group of largely business and technical leaders who were not only dedicated to the nation, but they believed in developing and adding value to this country's natural resources. And I think that that alone qualifies him to be listed as one of the great men of our nation.
I think he was more than just one of the greats. I think he was the greatest because of the conditions that he had to operate under with very limited funds.
He was a consummate leader, really. There was no need to impose iron discipline. People had respect for Sir George, and that wasn't necessary. He was tough to deal with, but he was always fair. His overall contribution was highlighted by the discovery of the deep copper ore bodies. That was first, last and foremost.
He worked his way up by starting as a surveyor and then being underground for a time as a mining engineer, and then he became underground manager and eventually general manager of the Zinc Corporation. They were difficult times, you know. There were many people living in tent houses, and it was a very poor little town. Apart from the great work Julius had done starting on the mine.
One of the things George did very quickly was to establish a town there and get housing developed and facilities to attract families there. And he did a fantastic job very quickly to develop a stable workforce. He very quickly got exploration going, looking for copper, and increased the ore reserves to 650, but also he found the 1100 ore body.
Sir George Fisher spoke to me on a couple of occasions about his greatest achievement with respect to government, the expansion that he drove in the 1950s and 1960s required a far improved railway line from Mount Isa to Townsville. His greatest achievement was to confront the federal government, which wanted the World Bank's requirement for the mine to guarantee the railway line debt. And he confronted Menzies directly. We will not do that. We are dedicated to the development of the Mount Isa operation. We're expanding, we're building one of the world's great copper mines. Although actually George didn't speak in those terms, but that's what he meant. And Menzies backed down. And the net result was that with the consistent support of the Queensland government, that railway line was upgraded, and the federal government finally came to the party.
Before the refinery was built, Mount Isa had a smelter and they produced blister copper, which was shipped to mostly to Port Kembla for refining. There was all sorts of delays and costs associated with that process. It usually take up to 9 months for them to get paid for their copper. So he decided that the best thing for Mount Isa was to have their own refinery, and that's when he built the refinery in Townsville. And in fact, you got your money for your copper within 2 months, and you didn't have to pay fees for them refining it. So it was a win-win in many respects.
He was one of the most influential people in Australia's development.
Under Sir George's leadership, the mine production of Mount Isa went from 1,500 tonnes a day to 16,000 tonnes a day. Copper production went from basically 0 to 100,000 tonnes a year, and it was on stream to go to 150,000 before he retired. Lead production was over 100,000. The lead and silver was probably the biggest lead and silver mine in Australia, one of the biggest in the world at the time. In the copper, it was number 9 worldwide. Copper ore reserves went from 3 million tonnes to 140 million tonnes. You certainly knew where you stood with him. He didn't hold anything back, he'd tell you. He encouraged people to work outside the box, and he sent technical people overseas regularly to improve their knowledge. He developed technology at Mount Isa, both in the mining side and smelters and refinery that was used worldwide. And people used to come from all over the world to visit Mount Isa in the 1960s.
Sir George always looked upon what could be made better in the town for people to want to live there. And he had a very strong interest in seeing town development happen and the community develop, and that required the environment to be improved.
MIM under George Fisher's leadership was responsible for transforming Mount Isa, the community, from a fairly undeveloped settlement into a major provincial city.
Under his leadership, the town developed from 6,000 people to plus 20,000 people. The payroll went from £7 million to £31 million.
I think there's no doubt that he had great vision, but he was a simple man. He wasn't a humble man, but he just had this passion for Queensland and the mining. My great memory of Dad, I think, is as a nation builder, a proud Queenslander and Australian, and he was able to leave the company debt-free when he retired, and a friend. He was a friend.